In the first century, Christians represented such a challenge to the conventions and order established by the all-powerful Roman Empire that this unleashed opposition and even terrible persecution. Today, Christianity has become the most widespread religion in the world. However, millions of Christians are still persecuted in our day and age. The Church of Smyrna, the second congregation mentioned in the book of Revelation, paid the high price of being the target of aggression in the first century. Can it possibly help the modern-day Christian church by showing it what sort of attitude to have in the face of such unjust suffering? The letter to Smyrna warns the church that difficult times lie ahead, and that its faith will be severely tested. I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan. Do not be afraid of what you are about to suffer. I tell you, the devil will put some of you in prison to test you, and you will suffer persecution for 10 days. Be faithful even to the point of death, and I will give you life as your victor's crown.
There's no words of blame. There's no problems because of this issue of persecution. So Jesus is encouraging them to continue through the time of persecution that they're experiencing.
The Smyrna church is going to experience a 10 days tribulation. It is not something to be taken literally. It means that it is going to experience very serious persecution.
What is going to happen to the Christians in Smyrna? What will I be able to learn from this church? Today, Smyrna has become the great Aegean metropolis of Izmir. To get there, I travel about 50 miles from Ephesus. Izmir is the third largest Turkish city after Istanbul and Ankara. It is Turkey's second port. It is a bustling, modern city, the one most westernized and most influenced by Europe and modern Turkey. Its residents are as hospitable as they are friendly. In ancient times, under Roman occupation, it was very powerful, both economically and politically.
It was a port town founded there after the time of Alexander the Great. It was situated at the end of a road that extended eastward all the way across Asia Minor. So we had a lot of traffic coming from the east, bringing various trade goods, including slaves, to the port of Smyrna to send and distribute throughout the Roman Empire. And it was renowned, again, throughout the Roman Empire as being that type of an intellectual city. It was noted as the traditional home of Homer. And of course, everyone was familiar. These were the school books of the ancient world, Homer's Iliad and Odyssey.
Smyrna was a prestigious city in Asia Minor. It competed with its neighbors, Ephesus and Pergamos, for political and economic power.
And these cities competed for civic honors. Who is the first and the greatest city of the province of Asia? So between Ephesus, Smyrna, and Pergamum, the first three cities among the seven, they are all extremely important port cities.
The Agora in Smyrna, the former administrative and commercial center of the ancient city, is the only genuine site of archaeological excavations in Izmir. I go there to start my investigation, This is where the best preserved remains of the city are to be found.
In antiquity, when cities were founded, there was a square in the center, an empty space. We built around the public establishments necessary for the city, and this place, which was called the Agora, became the center of the ancient cities. Shops and public establishments were located here. Many activities, such as fairs and festivals, made these agoras the place of socialization.
This was the heart of the city of Smyrna in ancient times. But over the following centuries, during the Byzantine period, insecurity and threats of Arab invasions prompted residents to move nearer to the port, to areas of the city that offered better protection. The Agora and Old Town Center gradually declined in importance and ultimately became a cemetery. This change in attitude towards the Agora explains why we now find gravestones and tombs linked to various religious beliefs here. This cemetery enabled ancient remains to be preserved and deterred people from erecting new buildings until the end of the Ottoman period. I discover that one of the tombs is decorated with a star with 6 points, the Star of David. It is obviously a Jewish tomb. This grave is proof of a Jewish presence in Smyrna.
Sources indicate that there was a Jewish community. Then, there was within this community the emergence, as was always the case, of a Christian community.
So important to remember that the core of all these early Christian communities are Jews who are followers of Jesus. So they are the first ones who have believed in many of these cities, because see Paul going into the synagogue first and preaching, and there will always be some of the Jews in the synagogues who become followers of Jesus.
We see that at the time of the apocalypse, we begin to have a separation which lasted for centuries between Judaism, which did not choose Christ, and Judaism, which followed Christ and allied with the pagans who became Christians. So we have the growing church and Judaism as we know it today.
So up to this point, the followers of Jesus were believed to be a sect of the Jews. And it's at this time now that the separation within the Roman thinking between the Jews and the followers of Jesus began. And I think we see this in the book of Revelation as well, with the language in the letters to Smyrna and Philadelphia of synagogue of Satan.
A verse in the letter to Smyrna says, "I know your afflictions and your poverty, yet you are rich. I know about the slander of those who say they are Jews and are not, but are a synagogue of Satan." So this letter refers to tension with the Jewish community, which is apparently hostile to these new Christian believers. But what is really happening? What does this startling expression, synagogue of Satan, mean?
Synagogue, etymologically, it means the place where we gather. It is the gathering of those who are with Satan.
This text has often been used by Christian anti-Semitism since the days of the Church Fathers. But when you take it into context, you realize that it doesn't apply at all to the Jewish community that there might be right here in Smyrna.
Unfortunately, Christians have used texts like this in anti-Semitic ways. And so we must carefully distinguish that this is not the intent of this.
When you realize that we are not facing a Christian church that appeared from nothing, and Judaism that continued as if nothing had happened, but that we are rather on two branches of the same tree, then you understand this fight. It is violent, because we are never as violent as when it touches us intimately.
So this tension now is growing within the Jewish communities about, what to do, with this group of Jesus followers. Now the pushing out of Jesus followers from the synagogue, from the Jewish communities here, and this is what is being addressed by John here.
So for the Apostle John, the synagogue of Satan refers to the group of Jews opposing Christians and accusing them before Roman authorities of not being true Jews. But when he talks about the suffering that the Church of Smyrna will have to endure, what is he really alluding to? What was really at stake for Christians detaching themselves from Judaism? We first need to understand that Jews enjoyed special dispensation in the Roman Empire.
The Roman Empire was a relatively tolerant empire, provided that the conquered people added to their pantheon the emperor, the cult of the emperor, and the goddess Roma.
In Smyrna, as in Ephesus and Pergamos, citizens worshipped the emperor. They venerated Roman emperors and the goddess Roma, who was over all the goddesses of the city of Rome as gods. Temples dedicated to these gods were considered to confer great prestige. They were funded and built by those cities to express their loyalty to Rome.
We have the imperial cult temples there in these three major cities, again for the Greek residents. They are to offer up worship, incense to the emperor as a Lord and God. And so this was part of the reality in living in these cities in the first century.
This was obviously something that was unacceptable to the Jewish people, and the Jewish people had been exempted from this obligation, provided that they offered in their temple not sacrifices to the emperor, but sacrifices for the health of the emperor.
This was very important, as it would have a dramatic effect on the early Christian communities from the beginning of the 2nd century.
From the moment the Roman Empire realized that Christians were not what they had thought, that is to say, a branch of Judaism, Christians were no longer covered by the consensus that had been granted to the Jews, so they found themselves under an obligation to worship the emperor.
This explains the dramatic situation in Smyrna. It meant that Christians were confronted with a terrible dilemma. Would they deny the emperor, or would they deny Christ?
One of the things that the provincial governors would try and do with the Christians is have them offer sacrifice to the genius of the emperor and to confess him as Lord and God. When they would refuse to do that, sometimes persecution resulted and even death.
So their positions started to become extremely difficult. Christians were perceived as being antisocial and rebellious towards the established order because of their insubordination and different value system. Rome began hounding these dissidents and unleashing persecution.
Well, until the time of Constantine, of course, we had various persecutions in the church. We had these waves of persecution in which many Christians died.
The persecution was not something that was permanent. It was something that depended on the mood of the emperors of the day. Some emperors were crueler than others.
A tragic event made the situation even worse. In 63 AD, a fire that raged for several days destroyed a large part of Rome, the capital of the empire. It was a terrible tragedy that claimed thousands of lives.
And there were rumors that circulated, according to which it was the Emperor Nero himself who had ordered Rome to be set on fire.
Witnesses said that they had seen Nero playing the fiddle while Rome burned behind him. He was said to have set the city on fire in order to destroy the older districts so that he could rebuild Rome to his liking.
These are the rumors. Whether or not it was ultimately he who set Rome on fire, historians are discussing that.
To silence these rumors, Nero accused Christians and had them tortured, calling the Christian religion an evil new superstition.
Nero looks for someone to blame this fire on, and the Christians become a very convenient scapegoat, and so this great persecution takes place.
In the direction of the current Vatican, he had created 2 rows of crosses on which Christians were crucified. Coated with pitch, he had lit them like living torches, and he passed in his chariot between his 2 rows of Christians playing the lyre. That also inspired him for his literary and artistic works.
Nero was without doubt the emperor who most traumatized Christians. His megalomania and pride were legendary. Considered to be an evil tyrant, he gradually became the embodiment of evil in the eyes of Christians.
Nero has become the very image of the monstrosity, like Hitler is for modern times.
This was the backdrop to the emergence of martyrs, Christians preferring to be killed as a testimony to their faith rather than renounce their beliefs. They died horrendous deaths they were made a spectacle of. An event that marked history then took place in Smyrna. It was here that St. Polycarp, a disciple of the Apostle John and one of the first bishops of the Church of Smyrna, was martyred. I crossed the town of Izmir to get to the church bearing his name. The building seems quite modest compared to the others around it. I'm due to meet the Archbishop of Izmir, Lorenzo Peretto, a former Dominican friar of Italian origin, an expert on the history of his illustrious predecessor, Bishop Polycarp.
Polycarp was the Bishop of Izmir. He was a disciple of the apostles, especially St. John. Maybe he knew him early in his life. He was still young. It is believed that he was born around the year 70. The Apostle John was already old, but he lived in this region. We actually think they got to know each other well.
There's a tradition that Polycarp had this link with John, and around 110 AD, we know he's already the Bishop of Smyrna. He was a very influential leader of the early church in Western Asia Minor in the 2nd century.
The church interior is magnificent. Frescoes depicting the life of St. Polycarp decorate the whole of the vaulted ceiling.
Polycarp, as the Bishop of Smyrna, was in a very difficult situation at the end of his life. There was opposition in the city of Smyrna against him. There was the beginning of persecution against the Christians.
He was persecuted on the denunciation of the Jews of the place. There was a conflict at that time between the Jews and then the Christian community. And Polycarp, being therefore the main representative, he was denounced to the Roman authorities.
Polycarp was warned by the disciples to flee the city of Smyrna, but he feels like he should return. And he appears before the governor, and the governor offers him his life. He says, "You're an old man, save yourself. All you have to do is offer incense to the emperor, and then you'll live." And Polycarp gives one of the most important confessions in Christian faith ever. He says, "For 86 years I've served the Lord, and he's done me no wrong. How can I forsake the Lord who saved me?"
He was meant to be burned alive, but the flames did not touch him, so they took swords.
And then he is stuck with a sword into his side, and Polycarp dies.
Everyone sang praises to God. It was a kind of glorification of Polycarp, his martyr.
Like Christ before him, Polycarp embraced death for the sake of the gospel. Many Christians have followed this fatal path throughout history. During my research, I have discovered that there is an organization that documents worldwide persecution against Christians. This NGO, Open Doors, has proof that persecution is still rife.
In 73 countries around the world today, Christians are persecuted for their faith. 73 countries. That's practically a third of the countries of the world. I can go further. 1 in 9 Christians in the world today are persecuted for their faith. Over 245 million Christians. So it has become a worldwide phenomenon. At Open Doors, to try to understand the persecution, in fact, we analyze 5 areas of life. And we not only look at the persecution, which is the violent persecution, murders, assassinations, rapes, people beaten, attacks on churches, but also daily pressure. In fact, we are talking about 2 things: the hammer persecution, which is violence, and the vice persecution, which is everyday pressure. The persecution is always a choice. If you don't want to be persecuted, it is very easy. Don't tell anyone you're a Christian. Don't live your faith in front of your neighbors. Keep everything to yourself. Don't go to church on Sunday morning, and you'll be left alone. And every Christian must make this choice. And in countries where you don't have the right to live your faith freely, it requires a choice to follow Jesus. If we look through the history of the church, we find exactly the same issues, the same choices. When the persecution comes, we have to make a choice. There are those who compromise, and there are those who remain faithful perhaps until death.
The danger in the West, I mean, let's say the countries where we can live very peacefully, is to settle down and consider that the comfort, the protection of God is ultimately a kind of Jew. And it is very dangerous because we no longer have the habit, the concept, the understanding that the gospel is also to join Christ in his sufferings.
If you read Revelation saying to yourself, at least one or the other church is being persecuted, this is proof that Revelation is a book to console persecuted Christians, saying to them, wait, it will soon be resolved. Read the letter to Smyrna seriously. It is said to them, the one who will be faithful until death. They are not going to be spared, any more than Jesus was spared.
This is what the Lord asks: remain faithful until death. It takes faith. It takes a commitment, a firm conviction to stay with the Lord.
Faithful unto death. It's a difficult issue. Would I be ready to give up my freedom to stay faithful to Christ? Observing the people strolling in the clock tower square at Izmir, I realize that I have no idea what my answer would be. The letter in the church to Smyrna encourages us not to fear suffering and death, but it also offers a greater hope, justice, and the hereafter.
What